In 43 years on this bench, I thought I had seen everything. Defendants who wept on command. Lawyers who twisted words into knots. Every manipulation, every performance, every desperate attempt to outrun consequences. I had witnessed all of it. But nothing prepared me for the morning a loaded gun was pointed directly at my face inside my own courtroom. February 8th, 2026. 9:47 a.m. The man holding that weapon wasn't a gang member. Wasn't a desperate criminal with nothing left to lose. He was Beverly Hills Police Chief Richard Vandermeer. Badge. Suit. Power. Connections reaching all the way to the governor's office. And he aimed a Glock 19 at a sitting judge because he believed, truly believed, that he was untouchable. He was wrong. It started as the most ordinary Tuesday morning imaginable. My clerk handed me a file. A traffic citation. Routine on the surface. Almost laughably routine. But inside that thin folder was a story that would eventually be covered across 73 countries, shake an entire police department to its foundation, and remind the world of something it desperately needed to remember. The defendant, Richard Vandermeer, 52 years old, Chief of Police, Beverly Hills. The officer who stopped him, Maria Santos, 34 years old, LAPD, single mother, 2 daughters, ages 6 and 8. Before Maria joined the LAPD 7 years earlier, she had completed 2 combat tours in Afghanistan as military police. She chose night shifts, the dangerous ones, the ones her colleagues avoided, so she could be present for her girls during daylight hours. Her eldest daughter, Emma, had been fighting leukemia for 2 years. Maria was buried under medical debt, working overtime whenever she could get it. Her fellow officers described her as someone who would hand over her last dollar to a stranger who needed it more than she did. On January 22nd, just after 11:30 p.m., Maria was running standard patrol along Interstate 405 when her radar clocked a black Cadillac Escalade doing 97 in a 65 zone. She activated her lights. The vehicle didn't stop immediately. It continued for another mile and a half before finally pulling over near the Sunset Boulevard exit. When Maria approached the driver's window, she recognized him immediately. Vandermeer was dressed in a Tom Ford suit worth more than 2 of her monthly paychecks. On his wrist sat a Patek Philippe timepiece valued at $80,000. The Escalade itself carried a price tag above $95,000. Maria was courteous, professional. She greeted him respectfully and asked for his license and registration. That's when everything began to collapse. Vandermeer looked at her badge, looked directly into her face, and told her she was a nobody officer from a nobody department who had absolutely no business stopping someone of his standing. He told her to get back in her patrol car and pretend this had never happened. Maria remained composed. She informed him she had clocked him at 97 miles per hour and needed his documentation. He laughed. Open, deliberate laughter, aimed directly at her face. Then he said something that made my blood run cold when I read it in her written report. He told her that her daughter's medical expenses must be mounting considerably, and that it would be a genuine shame if she were to lose her job and her health insurance over turning nothing into something. Read that again. A chief of police used a sick child as a bargaining chip to avoid a speeding ticket. Maria's hands were trembling. She wrote the citation anyway. Excessive speed. Failure to yield to an emergency vehicle. Reckless driving. Vandermeer snatched it from her hand, tore it into pieces in front of her face, threw the fragments out the window onto the highway, and drove away without another word. Maria got out of her car. She walked along the shoulder of the interstate and collected every torn piece from the asphalt. She documented everything in her official report and submitted it the following morning. 2 days later, her captain called her in. Quiet pressure had arrived from Beverly Hills. Someone well-connected wanted the citation to disappear. But her captain, Robertson, 28 years on the force, was not someone who bent to quiet pressure. He told Maria to pursue it through proper legal channels. He pledged his full support. And that is how Chief Richard Vandermeer ended up standing in my courtroom. When he walked through those doors at 9:45 a.m., The arrogance radiating off him was almost physical, like heat rising from summer pavement. Another expensive suit. Conservative estimate, $6,000. Berluti shoes adding another $2,000 to the picture. His attorney, Gregory Ashford, walked beside him, a high-profile Beverly Hills lawyer whose entire reputation rested on making wealthy clients' problems vanish quietly. Officer Santos sat in the gallery in her dress uniform. Combat Action Badge. Army Achievement Medal. LAPD commendations. Her posture was perfect. Hands folded. Eyes forward. The portrait of discipline. But I could read the exhaustion carved into her face. The specific kind that accumulates from double shifts and sleepless nights sitting beside a hospital bed, watching your child fight to stay alive. I called the case. Vandermeer stood the way men stand when they believe a courtroom exists beneath their dignity, as though granting me a favor simply by showing up. I invited Officer Santos to present her testimony. She stood. She described everything exactly as it had occurred. Precise. Detailed. Completely credible. She provided the radar calibration records, the dash cam footage, documentation without a single gap. When she reached the part about Vandermeer's threat involving her daughter, her voice wavered, just briefly, just for a moment, before she studied herself and continued. After 43 years on this bench, I know truth when I hear it. Every last word of it. Then it was Vandermeer's turn. His attorney rose to speak. Vandermeer waved him off. Literally dismissed his own counsel with a hand gesture, like swatting away an insect, and addressed me directly. He claimed the radar must have been faulty. He insisted he was only marginally above the speed limit. He suggested that Officer Santos had likely misread the device because she was distracted by personal matters. He delivered every word of this with a visible, deliberate smirk, while a mother sat across the room thinking about her daughter's cancer treatments. I asked him directly, had he threatened Officer Santos regarding her employment and her daughter's health insurance? He didn't pause for even a second. He acknowledged that he may have indicated that making unfounded accusations against a police chief could carry professional consequences for her career. He said it the way someone comments on the weather. His attorney's face turned the color of chalk. Even this expensive Beverly Hills lawyer understood what had just happened. His client had confessed to witness intimidation. On the record. In open court. But Vandermeer wasn't finished. He continued stating that Officer Santos ought to be more selective about who she chooses to pull over. That certain people in law enforcement have matters of significantly greater importance than minor traffic stops. I felt my jaw tighten. My father held this position before me. He taught me from the time I was young that every person, without exception, stands equal before the law. Whether you arrive in a rusted Honda or a customized Escalade, whether you carry a mop or a chief's badge, one standard, everyone. I ordered the dash cam footage displayed. The courtroom went silent. It was worse than the written report had conveyed. Every word was audible. His condescending tone, the explicit threats. The moment he tore that citation and threw it into traffic, you could see Maria's hands shaking while she fought to maintain her composure as this man mocked her and weaponized her child's illness against her. When the footage ended, the silence was absolute. Vandermeer sat back, projecting boredom, checking his phone beneath the table. I asked if he had anything further to add. He stood, and this time, something in his manner had shifted. The condescension had hardened into something else entirely. He told me he had spent 27 years in law enforcement, that he oversaw a department serving one of California's most affluent communities, that he had a personal relationship with the governor, that he regularly golfed with 2 sitting state senators and dined with the mayor of Los Angeles twice a year. Then he looked directly at me and said it. He said I was a traffic court judge who had spent my career managing minor inconveniences. He said I ought to be realistic about who I was dealing with. He said, and I remember these words precisely, that people at his level do not answer to people at my level. The room went completely still. I watched Officer Santos close her eyes slowly, as though she couldn't process what she was hearing. My bailiffs tensed. Everyone present understood that something was about to happen. Nobody yet knew what. I drew a breath. I told him that in this courtroom, there are no levels. I told him that the badge he carries is supposed to represent something real, service, protection, integrity, not threats aimed at single mothers, not leveraging a title to terrorize people who are simply doing their jobs. Then my clerk approached the bench with a folded note. I read it once. Then I read it again. The FBI had been running an active investigation into Chief Vandermeer for 8 months. Case number FBI 2026, CR 3342. Corruption, evidence tampering, systematic abuse of authority, multiple complaints from officers inside his own department. Federal investigators had been building their case methodically and had planned to move toward arrest within 2 weeks. But there was an addendum. Agents were already on their way to my courtroom. Based on the statements Vandermeer had made on the record, combined with his documented threatening behavior toward Officer Santos, they had made the decision to accelerate the timeline. The arrest warrant was being executed immediately. In 43 years, I had never been in this position. But I have never been someone who lets a teachable moment pass unused. I informed Vandermeer that before issuing my ruling on the traffic matters, certain additional information had come before the court. He registered mild irritation, the expression of someone whose time is being unnecessarily consumed. His attorney, by contrast, had developed the look of someone who senses catastrophe approaching, but cannot yet identify from which direction. I explained that the court had received information pertaining to pending federal charges, that FBI agents were currently in transit and would arrive momentarily. The transformation in his face was immediate. The practiced arrogance dissolved, replaced in rapid succession by confusion, then fear, then something raw and desperate. He rose so abruptly his chair scraped across the floor. He started shouting, actually shouting, inside my courtroom, calling it a setup, a coordinated attack, insisting I had no authority to hold him. His attorney grabbed his arm. Vandermeer shoved him aside. He began moving toward the exit. My head bailiff, Officer Marcus Thompson, former Marine, 15 years distinguished service, 6 feet 4 inches, planted himself in front of that door. He told Vandermeer calmly, without any trace of aggression, that he was required to remain in the courtroom. That is when Richard Vandermeer made the choice that obliterated his life entirely. He reached inside his jacket. He withdrew his service weapon, and he aimed it directly at me, seated on the bench, a loaded firearm, pointed at a judge. In a courtroom full of people, time altered itself. Everything moved at a different speed. I heard someone in the gallery scream. I watched Officer Santos leap to her feet. My bailiffs responded without hesitation, weapons drawn. Officer Thompson had his firearm aimed at Vandermeer within 2 seconds. I didn't move. I sat exactly where I was. I looked directly down the barrel of that gun. My heart was striking my chest so hard I could hear it. But my hands didn't tremble. My voice didn't break. I held his gaze. And I said one word. Don't. For approximately 5 seconds, perhaps fewer, perhaps slightly more, because time had stopped behaving normally, he stood there. Arm extended. Hand shaking. Face flushed crimson with something caught between rage and panic. Commands filled the air around him. Drop the weapon. Put it down. Get on the ground. And then his will simply gave out. His arm fell. The firearm slipped from his grip and hit the floor with a sound I will never forget. Officer Thompson moved with a speed I have genuinely never witnessed before or since. Face down. Hands restrained. In under 10 seconds, I counted from the moment that weapon hit the floor to the moment those handcuffs engaged. 9 seconds. 45 seconds total. From the moment Richard Vandermeer drew that weapon to the moment he was under arrest. 45 seconds that felt like 45 years. 45 seconds that ended a career, dismantled a reputation, and established without any remaining ambiguity that no one is beyond the reach of accountability. Within 3 minutes, FBI agents came through the courtroom doors. Special Agent Patricia Moreno, lead investigator on the Vandermeer case, assessed the scene in a single sweep and immediately assumed command. Vandermeer was advised of his federal charges. Officer Thompson began enumerating the new ones. Assault with a deadly weapon upon a judicial officer, brandishing a firearm within a courthouse, attempted intimidation of a judicial officer. The list kept expanding. After they removed him, I called a 15-minute recess. I walked to my chambers, sat at my desk, and simply breathed. My hands were shaking now. The delayed reaction, adrenaline receding, reality settling fully into place. Someone had pointed a loaded weapon at my face in the place that is supposed to embody order, safety, and the promise of justice. My clerk brought water. Officer Thompson checked on me, and Officer Santos stood outside my chamber door. When I invited her in, she broke down completely. She apologized through her tears, said this was her fault, said if she had just let the citation go, none of this would have happened. I stopped her immediately. I told her clearly, none of this was her responsibility, not one element of it. She performed her duties correctly, professionally, and with remarkable courage. She stood her ground against someone who had built an entire career around watching people back down. She refused to sacrifice her integrity even when the cost threatened to be everything she had. She was precisely the kind of officer every community deserves. I returned to the bench. News cameras had already gathered outside the building. Word travels fast. But I had matters remaining before this court. I called Officer Santos back to the stand. I entered a finding of guilty on every charge: excessive speed, failure to yield, reckless driving, willful destruction of a traffic citation, which I had personally witnessed on the dash cam recording. But beyond the rulings, I wanted something entered into the permanent record. Something I needed every person present and every person who would ever encounter this case to understand. I stated that Officer Maria Santos represented everything honorable about law enforcement. She served her country in a combat zone. She served her community without complaint. She worked punishing hours to keep her family afloat while her daughter fought for her life. And when confronted with corruption and deliberate intimidation from someone holding far greater institutional power, she did not yield. I stated that Richard Vandermeer represented everything destructive about the misuse of authority. He weaponized his position not to serve, but to dominate. He used his badge not to protect, but to threaten. He had convinced himself that his title granted him special standing, that his political connections made him immune, that his money elevated him above the rules that bind everyone else. And then I said what I have believed for every one of my 43 years on this bench. In the eyes of justice, there is no such thing as a special category of person. No amount of money, no political relationship, no title or rank places any individual above accountability. None. The federal trial came 6 months later. The evidence was insurmountable. Officers from his own department testified against him. Business owners described the protection payments they had made. Financial analysts mapped the money trail with surgical precision. And of course, there was the courtroom footage. A police chief drawing his weapon and aiming it at a sitting judge, captured from multiple angles on multiple cameras. The jury deliberated for under 4 hours. Guilty. On every count. Judge Patricia Morrison sentenced Richard Vandermeer to 18 years in federal prison. He will be 70 years old before he becomes eligible for parole. His pension was permanently revoked. His law enforcement certification was stripped and cannot be restored. He lost everything. And Officer Maria Santos? She received a formal commendation for valor from the LAPD. The FBI recognized her with a civilian citation for her cooperation throughout the investigation. 6 months after the trial, she was promoted to sergeant. The police union, alongside several community organizations, raised more than $200,000 to help with Emma's ongoing medical expenses. Emma is in remission. 8 months now. She's back in school. She plays soccer. She gets to simply be a child. And her mother comes home after every shift knowing she made the right choice. That she didn't allow someone with power and money and connections to simply rewrite reality and walk away unpunished. I return to that morning often. I think about those 45 seconds when everything existed on a knife's edge. I think about what could easily have gone differently. That weapon could have discharged. People could have been killed. The situation could have become something catastrophic and irreversible. But I also think about what went exactly right. A committed officer did her job in spite of direct threats against her livelihood and her child. A court process supported her. Federal investigators performed patient, methodical, thorough work. And when a powerful man tried to use violence as an escape route from accountability, every system around him responded precisely as it was designed to. Here is what 43 years on this bench has taught me. Justice is not automatic. It doesn't materialize because courts exist, or laws exist, or judges wear robes. Justice happens because people actively choose to create it. People like Officer Santos, who refused to be broken by intimidation. People like the officers who testified against their own chief at tremendous personal risk. People like the federal agents who spent 8 months building a case belt to withstand any challenge. People like my bailiffs, who place their bodies between danger and the people they are sworn to protect. Justice is a choice. Every day, in every situation, we choose whether to stand for what is right or to look away because standing is harder. We choose whether to hold people accountable regardless of their resources and connections, or to quietly extend to them exemptions we would never extend to anyone else. You may never be a judge, a federal agent, or a law enforcement officer. You may never find yourself at the center of a courtroom confrontation that makes international news. But you will encounter moments in your community, in your workplace, in your daily life, where the choice between what is easy and what is right sits directly in front of you. You will encounter people who have convinced themselves that their status protects them from consequences. You will witness injustice and have to decide whether to speak or to stay silent. In those moments, think of Officer Maria Santos. Remember that she was exhausted, frightened, financially stretched to her absolute limits, facing explicit threats aimed at her sick daughter. And she made the right choice anyway. She did not yield. She did not negotiate her integrity. She held her position. That is the real lesson here. Not the dramatic arrest footage. Not the satisfying finality of a verdict or a sentencing. Not even the image of a powerful man face down in handcuffs on a courtroom floor. The lesson is this. Ordinary people possess extraordinary power when they simply refuse to accept the premise that some individuals exist beyond the rules that govern everyone else. Maria Santos refused. And because she did, her daughter gets to play soccer.